In this tutorial series, I will focus on beginner series for Counter-Strike Global Offensive. So we're going to start with creating a simple room, adding a hallway, adding a second room. We're going to texture it, we're going to include and place some props. Then we're going to add some lights and compile the map and run it inside Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Now, in this first tutorial of the beginner series, we will be using BSP brushes and we're going to create a simple room. We're going to create the floor, the walls, the ceiling, and then we're going to add the hallway and create a second room. BSP brushes is what you'll be using most of the time to create and block in your environment. So in this first tutorial, we're going to cover the basics of how to get started. So first, let's go up to File and create a new map. We get a black void, black space of a perspective viewport here. So before we move on, let's go up to File and save our map. Your map files are VMF files and they get stored inside the Counter-Strike Global Offensive directory inside SDK content folder. So inside here, inside maps, I have a couple of folders created already for my projects, and here you can see that I have a couple of maps going. So for this map I'm going to save basic map 101 and I'm going to just give it an A as a variation number. So now that we have our map saved, we can begin to create our simple room. Now there are three things that are needed to create a functional map that you can run in game. First is you need BSP brushes that create the boundaries of your world. Second, you need a light, and third, you need the player start. If you have those three things, if you have BSP brushes that create the room, a light, and a player start, then you can successfully compile and jump inside the game and run around in this environment. Alright, so first let's create our floor. And we want to make sure that we select a texture that we want to use for our first brush. Right now by default, if you look over here, you see the default texture is this pills here. We want to change it, so let's click on Browse and inside Filter type in Dev. I'm going to cover more detail on how to use the textures and how to apply them and scale them and align them, but I will cover some of the basics of how to apply textures and using developer textures in this tutorial. So once you type in Filter for developer texture, let's scroll down and let's select for our floor. So I'm going to use this Dev Measure Grid. Double click to select it, and here we have the texture that's going to be active for our brush. On the left hand side here, we want to make sure that we select our block tool. This is going to create our BSP brushes. So with this active and making sure that we have our texture set, let's go into the top viewport, and in here I'm just going to left click, drag, and create our floor. Now I'm zooming in by using the mouse wheel. So here we have the floor with the dimensions 384 by 384. I want to make it 512 by 512. This is going to be a nice size room. Now remember that the scale of our character is 72 units, so this is a very large room. Let's go out to side view and let's bring this down and make the thickness of the floor at 32. And here we have in the perspective viewport, I maximized it, Shift C. Right now this is not a brush created, but this is a template of where the brush is going to be created. Once we're happy with where it's going to be, the scale and the height and the width of it, click enter to finalize the brush. Clicking off of it in the black void will deselect the brush. Once we have our floor created, we need to insert a player scale reference. This is going to be used to help with the dimension and the proportion of the environment. This is also going to end up being when the player starts. So let's go into the perspective viewport and go using the entity tool right here on the left hand side, Shift E, and once we have that active, right here on the right hand side, let me move this up. Under entities, I'm going to select Info Player Counter-Terrorist, and once I have that selected, left clicking inside on the floor inside the perspective viewport will place the scale model right on the floor. It will be slightly off the ground, but that's what we want. We don't want to place this player model, this player start, to be aligned with the floor. We want it to be slightly elevated above the ground. So this is going to be used to gauge scale and kind of determine overall proportion of the environment. So when we create our walls and when we create our doorways, when we place kind of the layout of the room, we want to have this player model kind of tell us how big this room needs to be and kind of give us an overall scale of the world. This helps tremendously in keeping your map to proportion. So once we have that placed, let's go back and let's begin to create our walls. So to create our walls, we can repeat the same process by creating template BSP brushes, then finalizing them, then doing it all over again. But there's an easier and simpler way to do so, and that's by taking already created brush and duplicating it and then using it and resizing it for the walls and the ceiling. This is the best and the fastest way for you to begin using BSP brushes, by duplicating already created brushes and then just retexturing and then resizing them. So I'm going to select by left clicking on our floor. I'm going to go into the side view and I'm going to hold down shift, left click, drag to duplicate the brush, and we can see that it's duplicated. Now we just need to resize it. I'm going to go into top view and just drag it, and I'm going to give the wall width 16, and now I'm going to do this and repeat this for all the other walls. But before I do that, I'm going to make sure that the wall height is at 128 units. So right now it's set at 32, so if I drag it up, it's changing, and let's bump it up to 128. This is going to be our height for the wall. So here we have it. Now there's a lot easier if we use a developer texture that kind of tells us how large this wall is and uses a scale reference as a texture. So to do so, we're going to use the toggle texture applicator tool. So we click this and we want to click on browse, and let's select something better. Here we have dev measure wall. This is the one we're going to use. So let's double click to select it, and then with the face edit sheet open and still active, we're going to right click to apply. Now this applies only on one face. If we want to apply to every single face on the brush, hold down shift and right click, and it will apply to every single face of that particular brush. So now we have it. Let's just left click to select that face, and we want to just move it up so it's aligned, and I'm going to just justify to the top. So now we have our wall with a developer texture for the player height, which kind of gives us a better proportional scale to play around with alongside our player start. So let's duplicate and create the rest of the 4 walls. Let's go to the top view, shift left click drag on the brush, and then do it again, shift drag. I'm going to drag it over just a tiny bit, and I'm going to move one of the faces, resize it, and then move it all the way over here. I don't want my brushes to overlap. I want to make sure that they're nicely snapped to each other and then there is no overlapping. And since we are snapping on the grid and our grid size is nice and big at 16, this will snap very nicely and everything is going to be sealed off. One of the key things you want to keep in mind is when you are blocking in your environment, you want to make sure that there are no gaps at all between brushes that open you to the black void, to the black space outside. The way Hammer works is it will give you an error anywhere where there is a gap. So that's why staying on the grid is very important. So let's say I bumped the grid down to a very low number. I kind of messed around at a 1 unit. and then I'm working back up at 16, and I don't notice this little gap, which is very hard to see. And then when I compile, it's going to give me an error. So you want to make sure that when you're blocking in your world, you're avoiding on blocking in at anything lower than 16. You can detail later within the world at a lower grid setting, but stay at a very large grid setting when you are blocking in. So let's create our last wall over here. So now we have our 4 walls, and let's take the floor and we're going to duplicate, shift drag to the ceiling, and let's hit escape to deselect it. Now we are inside the room and we have our floor, ceiling, and 4 walls, and everything is sealed off. This room is like a vacuum. Nothing is going out, nothing is coming in from the black world, from the black void outside. Now if we want to apply the same alignment to the rest of the walls, let's open up the face edit sheet again, select the wall by left clicking, and then just hitting top for justify. Or we can also hit bottom. This will do the same. Again, I'm going to cover more in detail on applying textures in a later tutorial, but I just wanted to give you a few tips on how to do so when you're blocking in your BSP brushes and using developer textures. Now that we have a simple room created, we need to expand further and begin creating a hallway and adding a second room. Before we go on and do that, I want to talk about another feature inside Hammer, which takes a brush and it hollows it out. Underneath Tools, Make Hollow. What that does, it hollows the room out without having you to create individual walls and floors. To use the Make Hollow tool, first we need to create a block of the BSP brush that we can hollow out. So let me go inside Top View. Let's browse, let's select something different. Let's use this measure grid that we use for a floor and the ceiling, and I'm going to draw out very similar dimension room that we used over here on the left. So I have the template drawn out. Let's go into side view and draw out the same scale for the height. So let's go into perspective and let's press enter. Right now this is a solid block of BSP, nothing inside. So once we select it, let's go to Tools and Make Hollow. Hammer will ask you how thick do you want your walls to be, and 32 sounds good. So I'm going to click OK. Now if we go inside, we have our walls, our ceiling, and everything is hollowed out. And all these brushes have been grouped for us. And this creates a nice room without much effort of creating each individual wall. And if we want to ungroup and texture all the walls, we just need to go up to Tools and Ungroup. And now we have individual BSP brushes all by themselves. And this is a very quick and easy way to get something going. I don't like to use the Make Hollow. I prefer to build individual walls, floors, and the ceiling by hand. This way I have complete control of the thickness, of the length, of the width, and I know exactly where everything is being snapped to. So this has a function of building something really quick. But I would suggest you not use this and actually build individual walls, ceiling, floor, just like we did in our example room here, by actually dragging each wall and resizing it ourselves. This way you have complete control of everything that you are building and creating, versus letting an automatic function just kind of define everything for you. Now let's continue to add a second room and a hallway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this created room, I'm going to duplicate it, move it over, and I'm going to create a hallway to connect these two rooms in between. So let's select all the brushes that we have in here, and the way I'm selecting multiple brushes is you left click to select one brush, hold down Control, and then select the second brush, third, and so on, and it will add to a selection. If you want to subtract from the selection, just simply hold down Control again and left click to deselect the brush that you don't want. We want all of the brushes here, and we do not want the player start. So we're just going to deal with the BSP brushes. I'm going to go into the top view. I'm going to hold down Shift, left click, drag, and drag it over. Go in the perspective viewport and check. So here we have our second room. Next I'm going to take these walls, I'm going to resize them down so I can begin to add a hallway. So I'm going to select both of these walls from the first and the second room, and I'm going to resize it down in the top view. I'm just going to drag it down. You want to be very careful that if you're going to resize two different BSP brushes at the same time, that they're exactly the same and they're on the same grid spacing. So here I selected two and I resized it down, and I should not have any problems with both of these brushes staying on the grid. Now if I were to select one brush that was slightly larger than the other, and if I were to resize and drag them down both at the same time, you can see that one of the brushes is going off the grid. So you want to be very careful that if you're going to resize two brushes at the same time, and they're exactly the same and they're on the same grid lines. So let's drag this down. We opened up our big space over here. I'm going to take these two brushes, I'm going to duplicate them, I'm going to drag them up, and actually I'm going to drag them all the way up to the other side. So now we have just little indentations on each corner of the walls. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create two hallways, kind of creating a circular pattern. So you can go from one room to another and then just come out from the other hallway. So I'm going to take these two brushes, I'm going to drag them out. I'm going to leave a little bit of space for the doorways right over here. Again, in the top view, drag them out, and I'm going to stop and leave exactly the same amount of space for the second hallway. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grid spaces, and there's about, there's 5 grid spaces here. So in the perspective viewport, I'm deselecting, and so this is what we have. So now I'm going to select one of the brushes, and we need to create a little indentation up above, kind of creating a door frame. So I'm going to go in the top view, I'm going to shift drag and then resize it down so these two brushes meet exactly the same and they're lined up. And then I'm going to select the one that I need to go up at the top, and I'm just going to, from the side view, drag it up to about, so it's 32, and then take a look at the perspective viewport so we have so we can see it. And if you're not sure how large this is, we can use our developer texture to see where the height of the character would be and where the top of this doorway is, and we can also take this player scale reference and we can just drag it to the right to the doorway, and we can kind of see how big this doorway is. And this looks pretty good. The player would fit right through it. So now I just need to take this and I'm going to duplicate it on all the rest of the doorways. Now we need walls, ceiling, and floor to connect. So once we create one, we can just duplicate it right over to the other. So I'm going to take the floor, shift drag, and resize it down. For the hallway, I want probably 2 grid spaces on each side. And let's drag this over here. Again, checking the perspective viewport, this floor is good width. And I'm going to take this, duplicate it for the ceiling. So we have the ceiling, floor, and I'm going to duplicate it again. I'm actually going to use one of these walls. And I'm going to duplicate the walls and size it down to 32 and move it over, and this creates our wall. And once you get used to working in 4 perspective viewports and kind of shifting back and forth, checking in perspective, and then jumping back into the top view and using these brushes, you kind of get a sense of where they need to line up, where the walls are. So creating your first room may take a little while, but the more you work with BSP brushes, the more intuitive and very fast you begin to block in your environment. So I took this wall and I duplicated it over, and since we have this hallway created, I'm just going to take this entire hallway, duplicate it, and move it over to the other side. So again, I'm holding down Control, left clicking, and selecting all 4 BSP brushes. Going to top view, and I'm going to shift drag and duplicate it right over here. And again, we can see that we have 2 spaces on each side, so I want to make sure that when I line up these brushes, I have the wall and then the free grid space over here. And here we are, we have 2 hallways, 2 rooms, and if I wanted to, I could resize this second room and maybe make it a little higher. So if I were to do that, I would simply go in the side view, take this, maybe move it up. In the perspective viewport, we can see how high this is, and then I would need to select all the walls and move them up. But just as I described earlier, you don't want to select the brushes that are not the same as everything else. So I'm going to deselect and make sure that I select all the walls first and not the top of the doorways, and make sure they're all the same, and they are. And I'm just going to take this and drag it until it meets the ceiling, and then I'm just going to take these doorways and inside either front or side view and just drag them up. So here we have a taller version of the room. So we have 2 hallways, 1 tall room, and a little smaller room. So as you can see, using BSP brushes, you can quickly block in your environment, especially when you create a couple of walls, and then you can just shift drag, resize really quick, and get an environment going very, very fast. I love using BSP brushes in Source. You can put together a very large and complex environment very quickly. It's just a matter of making sure that you are snapped on the grid, just having continuous practice of creating and using BSP brushes, and just jumping between viewports back and forth. Once you get that workflow going, you can just block in and block out your environments, your entire maps in just a couple of days. So you can spend more time in gameplay testing and then lighting detail in the world.